Hello, welcome to Women of the Future. This is episode 29, where we will be looking at Headspace, Heartspace. In the series, we focus on spirituality, how one can use spiritual principles to empower oneself, and we have covered a variety of topics that we hope will be of some interest and relevance to your personal as well as professional life. Sister Denise is our speaker in the series, and it is she who has been sharing her wisdom and experience with us. Sister Denise, a very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Now, tell me, Headspace, Heartspace, that is a very interesting topic, isn't it? Why is it of importance to you that one understands Headspace and Heartspace? And let's start with, like we do in all the episodes, what is your definition of Headspace?
Well, your head is to do with your intellect, your reasoning, is the rational, non-emotional aspect, and then of course with that you will bring in the color of the heart space, because the heart is your feelings, your higher purpose, I think, is really the balancing of the head and the heart, you see, because the heart is really the color and the head is really the shape. And everything has shape and color. If you have color, no shape, that's something. Shape, no color, boring, So it's really all about having both of these together. And usually women are associated with the heart, with feeling, with color, with texture, with all of these things. And then the masculine is spoken of as more to do with the head. And we want to look at both together, and we want to look at balancing them, because I think when we're talking about women of the future need to be in balance, and the head and the heart both have to be fully developed and fully in balance.
Okay. Now, Sister Denise, a heart space. Is it not the case that most women experience life through the feelings primarily and through the head secondarily?
To a large extent, probably so. It depends very much on the individual. A woman who is soft operates through the heart. Maybe the hardened woman operates through the head. And sometimes life will harden you, or sometimes even in spirituality it is said that you have to harden yourself a little bit, otherwise you're too vulnerable. And so this is where we're all the time working out how to establish the different parameters that apply to the head and the heart.
What is the danger of only living in one's heart, only experiencing life through feelings and using feelings as a sole source of information and data and motivation for what one does? What is the danger in that? The reason I'm asking is because I know a number of women who fall into this category. Good quality women.
You see, your feelings shift and change. And when you make decisions based on feelings, something that seems like a good idea at that time, when the weather changes, the feelings are different, and it's a different angle. You would decide differently. So I think that if you operate only on the basis of the heart, you become whimsical, changeable, and then it's not so solid,
The opposite of that, what is the caveat that you have for women who live only in their heads?
Well, when you live only in your head, you don't take into consideration very important things like somebody's well-being would be less important. Maybe you focus more on sort of rules and something a bit more scientific, you can say. The heart is to do with the arts, to do with textures, colors, culture, taste, all of these things. The head is to do with principles, things that may be less movable, And, the example I very often give is that eyes have two kinds of cells. One of them is cells that show the shape, but that's always in black and white. And then the other type of cells, which need more light, give you the color. So if you're operating only in low light, you can't see everything. So I think probably the aspect of the heart allows us to see a much wider, denser, deeper spectrum of reality than if we're just looking at the shapes and things in different shades of grey.
Sister Denise, in one's personal life, your domestic life, is it necessary to use both aspects of the human functioning, or do you use heart? I have asked you this question in a previous episode, but I think it's relevant again. When it comes to relationships, okay, women especially use their feelings to guide them. I'm talking about the most relationship in your life, as well as your relationship with other family members and friends. Oh, I like this person, so I'll hang out with him or her more. Does the intellect come into play as far as choosing people in our life is concerned, and as far as trusting people is concerned?
Well, no, I think it's very important, because if you operate only on your feelings, you're also driven by your karma, by your sanskaras, more than by your intelligence. Although people do speak of the intelligence of the heart, but still, if you follow your heart, which is colored by your karmic accounts, you will get yourself into more trouble. Then there's another thing that happens, and that is that people have, when I use the word sanskaras, I'm talking about patterns of behavior, patterns of response, all of these patterns. The mind is under the influence of the sanskaras, or the subconscious, you can say. And then if you are operating with karmic accounts, if you're operating out of character defects or so, it will just carry you on in that same direction. I think the advantage of bringing in spiritual intelligence is you're bringing in more information which may be necessary to shift the direction of the stream of your life, which may be heading to a disastrous course onto a more healthy course. Because you see, we don't operate just from a clean white sheet of paper. We come from a lot of baggage, a lot of history, which the mind and the heart just thinks that's how it is. It doesn't really see that's what happened. It's different.
I see. So now, Sister Denise, in a professional environment, is it ever okay to let your feelings come into play? Because there are many listening to you who have jobs that totally cerebral in its demands. How does one function in a work environment using spirituality and using the knowledge that you just shared?
Well, you see this. If you have a very cerebral piece of work or work environment, you're still working with people, and people have things happening in their lives, and if you become insensitive to people, you will not be able to bring in a certain dimension that is definitely required in the community of the professionals that you're working with. So that then is actually a very important dimension. But I think that we have to be very aware that we don't use or follow our feelings inappropriately.
Wait, hold on. What does that mean?
If you get emotionally caught up in something, and then your professionalism would be compromised by your emotional feelings, and that's inappropriate. So you have to really set some rules for yourself, and this is all a matter of balancing, and you have to really see, what is my role here, what is my function here? And there I think the conscience comes into it, because if something requires the softness of a woman's sensitivity, your conscience will alert you to bring that in. It happens in professional environments. You get emotionally involved with some of the people, and that is not appropriate. And so there you have to keep a cap on it, because otherwise there's going to be problems.
Sister Denise, the expression to apply one's mind to something. Is it the application of one's mind, or is it the application of thought, considered thought, that's being asked?
The word mind, intellect, intelligence, thought, because they're very subtle, the distinctions get very blurred. So to me, if you say apply your mind, it's really apply your thinking, your reasoning, your intelligence, and of course thought is part of that. But if you say, no, something's coming into my mind, there you're talking about something a bit more intuitive, a little bit more, like capturing an idea from the airwaves.
When it comes to a problem that we are faced with, as you so rightly put it in a previous episode, problems crop up at probably every single second of the day. And issues come up from one's subconscious as well, every single second of the day. When one is presented with such a dilemma, where you have a problem to solve, how do you know what to follow? Do you head or heart?
What I would do in any situation, especially if it sort of raises emotions, or there's some crisis or something like this, the first thing I would do is really detach from the situation. And that means be as cool and uninvolved as possible, and look at it from the angle of a detached observer and evaluate it using your powers of discernment and good judgment. And once you have decided the position, the angle of approach that you're going to take, definitely bring your heart with you. But I think don't start with your feelings, start with an assessment.
I think that's where most of us make a fatal error, not just an error, but a fatal error. Because, Sister Denise, when we are faced with a problem and when we are faced with a crisis, our feelings rush in. It's almost like an injury that has occurred somewhere in the body, and your protective mechanism rushes in to try and solve the problem. And you are saying, let the head reach there first and make sure the heart's behind. We all make the mistake of doing it the other way around.
Well, it's because women are very sensitive. So sometimes we need to just tell our sensitivities, just sit down for a minute, let me check this out, and then you come along. And this is where there is a masculine side and a feminine side to everyone. And I think the assessing aspect corresponds to the masculine side, the cool, calm, collected, uninvolved one, which is very good, I think. And once you've decided what it is, if you're heartless, that's not good. So definitely bring the heart in, but the heart is always... it needs to be, in a sense, secondary to good judgment.
Sister Denise, women are, I'm going to use the word notorious for being emotional. Okay? Often to our detriment. How does one pull oneself out of emotion? A friend of mine said to me this year, whenever I see someone crying, I automatically start crying, even though I don't know what the first person's crying about. It's a Pavlovian response. She said, I'm not proud of this trait, but that's where I am. So she has my sympathies because there are many of us on the planet like that. She was brave enough to admit it. So how does one, knowing that you're emotional, knowing it's a weakness, how do you neutralize that?
Being emotional doesn't mean that you're bad, but it means that your emotions get the better of you. And this is why I think the correct position is, as I said before, just see what you are dealing with here. You need to be the one who controls your feelings, which is not the same as suppresses.
Explain that to us on a practical level. Can I give you an example, because I think it's a very important point for today's discussion. If a woman sees someone harming her child, and she is very much aware of the child's needs for protection, but also very much aware of the rage that is emerging in her. Okay, it's a situation that requires a decision be made and action to be taken almost immediately. How then do you manage your feelings, not make the situation worse than it is, and act in the best interest of yourself, and more especially a child whom she has a duty to protect?
It reminds me of an incident where a Swedish mother and family were on a beach when the 2004 tsunami hit, and so it was a huge wall of water. That mother ran, picked up her child and protected it. It's almost as if the instinct to protect her child enabled her to run at superhuman speed and act at a rate and with an instancy that is beyond normal. And I think this is a phenomenon that comes in. I had another experience, a personal experience. My mother had a car accident and was walking very delicately because the legs had been damaged, and I was bringing her out of a taxi, and then the taxi rolled back over her foot. I lifted the car, little me, lifted the car and pulled her foot out. And I was so surprised, but yeah, it happened. There were witnesses. I
must admit, I never thought you to be the car lifting type, but yes, that is quite amazing.
But I mean, it's a phenomenon that may well be there in women or men equally, but definitely the sort of the protecting side of the woman will suddenly infuse you with superhuman strength when needed. And that is, I can say, inexplicable, but it's a phenomenon that happens. Where somebody is harming your child, I think in a way this kicks in, and you may say rage, or you may say energy, or I don't know which word is the best for it, but you will do whatever you have to do. And it's almost as if a higher power takes over. That's the feeling.
Okay, so Sister Denise, a balanced and healthy adult woman, how is she to be?
Balance of the head and the heart. Again, I would say, your common sense, your intelligence, your considered opinion must be the dominant factor over feelings. I would say, because as soon as feelings dominate over common sense, in a way your intellect becomes the slave of your mind. And correctly in spirituality we would always say that the intellect has to be the dominant force, and it doesn't mean that you're suppressing and repressing and putting away your feelings. That's a different thing.
Another scenario that comes to mind is that given the fact that we all have very individualistic personalities, what almost all of us do, Sister Denise, is when I feel like having a chocolate, I have a chocolate. When I feel like going for a run, even though it's -5 degrees outside, I just feel like going for a run, I go for a run. When I feel like ... Okay? Many women act on what impulse presents itself at the time. How then would one judge whether you're acting from headspace or heartspace in this scenario, and which is the right way to do it?
Well, you use the word impulse, which is indicative, like impulse buying. You buy something, oh, that looks nice, I'll buy it.
Yeah.
I don't need it.
Yeah, we're all like that. We all have that weakness where you think, what's the big deal? It's just a little piece of chocolate. I'm just going for a jog. We make split-second decisions, which aren't actually decisions. They're just, I'm going with the flow of whatever emerges in my mind.
Lack of discipline.
Okay.
Because your priorities are for your senses. Because you want to have a chocolate because it tastes good. You want to buy this thing because it looks nice. You want to go for a run because it'll feel good. It's all about sense perception, which has to be secondary to what makes sense.
Okay, is that what you mean by common sense has to prevail over feelings and emotions?
Yes.
This talk was far more sobering than I realized it would be, which is a good thing, actually. So, Sister Denise, what you're advocating is that one should approach one's life through common sense rather than just let your feelings let you know which way to go.
I would say.
Okay. God, how does he fit into head and heart space? Does God even enter this picture? And Sister Denise, does God change the way you be/are? Does he change that?
To me, God represents truth. God is love, purity, clarity. A friend of mine always says love is not an emotion. Love is a verb.
Yeah.
So an act of love is an act which is beneficial, not an act of desiring. You see, very often people say, I love you, and in Spanish, of course, yo te quiero means I want you. That means we will sort of change the meaning of the word, an emotive word, to refer to I'm satisfying my neediness. You see, this is an interesting aspect of women, is very often women are needy in terms of emotion, and then they will become emotional in order to get some emotional satisfaction, which becomes a kind of an addictive behavior, like we were talking earlier about all the drama and so on. But I think to be serene, to be sort of balanced, stayed, clear in everything, not to get overwhelmed by the ups and downs, the tsunamis of feelings, so that your feelings are not negative emotions, but refined, finer feelings. That is really what spirituality helps us with. And I think when a woman is spiritually weak, she gets very emotional. And on the other hand, when a man gets spiritually weak, the sort of the aggressive emotions come out, because there is difference between a man and a woman in a general way. But I think the sign of being full is that you are emotionally stable and emotionally refined, and that you are capable of sustaining yourself from God, and that you don't use other things or other people to fill that hole in your soul, which a lot of women do.
We have to say goodbye to you right now. What I invite you to do is to do a synopsis or postmortem of the day that you've just had, the past 24 hours, and ask yourself, where do you spend more time, in your head or in your heart? It involves some measure of introspection. It also involves a measure of honesty, where you ask yourself, where am I at? And as Sister Denise spoke, I got the image of a tightrope walker. To be imbalanced in either of those ways does not serve you. That is the message I got from today's talk. So I do thank you for your time, and I do wish you everything of the best on your own spiritual development. Take care. Goodbye.